There's one question almost no man ever asks someone who's already built real wealth. It's not, what's the best investment you ever made? It's this, what's the purchase you regret the most? Not because it was a bad purchase, but because you made it at the wrong time? Because when men look back after 20 or 30 years of building wealth, many of them realize they have one thing in common. Their biggest financial losses rarely came from a bad investment. They came from decisions that at the time seemed completely normal. Decisions that made perfect sense. Decisions that felt like progress, but quietly delayed their ability to build wealth for years. While you're making that decision, it's almost impossible to realize that it will cost far more than you imagine, because no one ever shows you the full price. You only see the immediate benefit. The real cost doesn't show up until years later. When you realize how much wealth never had the chance to exist because of a single decision made at the wrong time, if you're a man who wants to build real wealth without falling into the financial traps that almost everyone else considers normal, make sure to subscribe to the channel. My name is Ben, and today I'm going to show you one of the most common financial decisions that can delay your financial freedom for years, why millions of men keep making this mistake without realizing it, and most importantly, the simple strategy wealthy men use to avoid this trap and build wealth much faster. If you asked 100 men why so many of us go through life without ever building real wealth, you'd probably hear the same answers over and over again. The paycheck is too small. They lack financial education. Debt is suffocating them. Or maybe they just don't have enough discipline. And to be fair, all of those explanations sound perfectly reasonable. After all, every one of them can make it harder for anyone to get ahead financially. But there's something interesting. Even men who increase their income, who work hard, and who invest consistently every month often still fail to build the wealth they expected. How is that possible? Maybe because they're trying to solve the wrong problem. Because there's one incredibly common factor present in the lives of millions of men that quietly destroys wealth. It doesn't attract attention. It rarely makes anyone feel guilty. In fact, most people don't even see it as a mistake. Quite the opposite. Many believe it's simply a normal part of everyday life. And maybe that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. You probably won't find many people warning you about it. You won't see headlines saying it can delay your financial independence for years, and you certainly won't hear many conversations describing it as one of the biggest obstacles to building wealth. Because when almost everyone does the same thing, it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like something you're simply supposed to do. That's why so many men keep repeating this pattern generation after generation without ever stopping to question it. And that leads us to a question worth asking. If this really is one of the biggest reasons ordinary men struggle to build wealth, why does almost nobody talk about it? Let's do a simple exercise. If there really is one factor that destroys more wealth than most people realize, it makes sense to eliminate the most obvious suspects before we get to the answer. The first candidate is usually housing, and it's easy to see why. For many families, it's the biggest expense in the budget. Rent or a mortgage can consume a significant portion of your income for years. That's why many people assume their home must be the main reason they struggle to build wealth. But there's an important detail. Most of the time, housing isn't a decision that changes dramatically from one year to the next. People usually stay in the same home for many years. And besides, everyone needs a place to live. That cost exists regardless of the lifestyle someone wants to project. Now think about taxes. They also seem like the perfect villain. After all, nobody likes seeing part of their paycheck disappear before it even reaches their bank account. But there's a problem with that explanation. Taxes don't target only the people who struggle to build wealth. They affect almost everyone. They're an unavoidable expense, but they rarely explain why two people with similar incomes end up in completely different financial situations. What about food? That seems like another obvious answer. Prices keep rising. Groceries take a bigger bite out of the budget. Eating out can get expensive fast, but just like housing, food is a basic necessity. Sure, it's possible to overspend, but in most cases, it isn't what creates the biggest gap between the people who build wealth and those who stay financially stuck. So maybe it's everyday bills, electricity, internet, water, phone service, subscriptions. Together, they definitely make up a meaningful part of the monthly budget. And if you think about it, they all have one thing in common. Almost nobody makes those decisions because of status. Most of them simply exist because everyday life requires them. So if it isn't housing, or taxes, or food, or everyday bills, what's left? Well, what's left is an expense that rarely raises any concern. In fact, many people even see it as a sign of progress. Yet over the years, it can consume more money than almost anything else. We're talking about transportation, more specifically, the way most men buy cars. Let me show you exactly what I mean. This may be the part that surprises people the most. The problem has never been buying a car. Every man needs transportation. For some, a car is practically essential for getting to work, taking care of the family, or simply making everyday life more convenient. So, no, the mistake isn't owning a car. The mistake begins when a man buys an asset that starts taking money out of his life every single month, without realizing he's accepted that commitment as something completely normal. Because the price you see at the dealership is almost never the true cost of that car. In reality, it's just the first payment of many. The moment the car pulls into your driveway, something quietly begins to happen. It starts losing value, even if it just sits there, even if it has very few miles on it, even if it's been exceptionally well maintained. While many assets tend to appreciate over time, a car usually does exactly the opposite, and that's only the first layer. If it's financed, now you have interest. In many cases, a man ends up paying far more for the car than he originally expected. Then comes insurance, which has to be renewed every year, then fuel, which follows every mile you drive, then maintenance, new tires, routine service, brakes, oil changes, parts that simply wear out over time. Then come the taxes, registration fees, vehicle licensing, and a long list of expenses that seem small when viewed individually, but keep showing up year after year. Now notice something important. None of these expenses seems capable of destroying someone's wealth on its own. The problem is that they never show up alone. They all work together. As long as that car sits in your driveway, there's an invisible meter running around the clock. Every month, it demands another payment, another expense, another dollar leaving your pocket. And that's probably the biggest difference between a car and most other purchases. A car doesn't charge you just once on the day you buy it. It keeps charging you for as long as you own it. Month after month, year after year, no breaks, no discounts. And it's that endless stream of expenses that prevents so many men from turning income into wealth. Because a large portion of the money that could have been building assets ends up being spent simply to maintain an asset that, in most cases, continues to lose value. But that leads us to an even more interesting question. If this pattern is so expensive, and if these costs are so predictable, why do so many intelligent men keep making the exact same decision? It all begins the moment the real problem becomes what a car has come to represent over the years. At some point, buying a car stopped being just a practical decision. It became a way of telling the world something about yourself. For many men, a car has quietly become a symbol of success, as if it says, "I made it. I'm winning. My life is finally on the right track." What's interesting is that this almost never happens consciously. Very few men walk into a dealership telling themselves they're buying recognition. But deep down, there's often a need driving that decision. The desire to finally make all of their hard work visible. Because for years, nobody sees the overtime. Nobody sees the stress. Nobody sees the risks they've taken. But a brand new car, and everyone sees that. And maybe that's exactly why buying one carries so much emotional weight. It feels like years of hard work have finally turned into something tangible, something that can be seen, something that can be admired. Without realizing it, many men begin to tie their own sense of worth to the kind of car they drive, as if a better vehicle automatically means a better life, as if respect can be purchased along with the keys. The problem is that emotional decisions often create financial consequences that last for years, because emotions fade. The excitement of driving a new car wears off. The novelty disappears. What once felt extraordinary quickly becomes part of everyday life. But the financial commitment remains, and it keeps demanding money long after that initial excitement is gone. That's one of the biggest paradoxes of this decision. The more a man tries to buy a temporary feeling, the longer he ends up paying for it. Meanwhile, there's another group of men taking a completely different path. They like nice cars too. They appreciate comfort. They value quality. The difference is that they don't use a car to prove they've made it. They make it first. Then they let the car become the result of that success. Some men use money to buy appearances. Others use money to build wealth. And that's exactly where a consequence almost nobody calculates begins. Because in the end, the purchase price of the car isn't even close to being the biggest cost of that decision. There's one question almost no man asks before buying a car. It isn't, how much does it cost? Or, what will the monthly payment be? The question that almost never comes up is a different one. How much will this money stop building if I choose to put it here instead? That single shift in perspective completely changes the way you look at any major purchase. Because when a man buys a car, he usually calculates only what's going to leave his bank account. He almost never calculates what will never have the chance to come back. And that's where economists introduce a concept called opportunity cost. In simple terms, every time you choose one path for your money, you automatically give up every other path that same money could have taken. Let's make that real. Imagine a man buys a car that costs $40,000. On top of that, between the payment, insurance, fuel, and maintenance, the car costs him roughly $900 every month. Now imagine a different scenario. Instead of committing that money to the car, he buys a much more modest vehicle and invests the difference in a broadly diversified index fund, such as an ETF that tracks the US stock market, earning an average historical return of about 0.8% per month, roughly 10% per year, although future returns are never guaranteed. After just 6 months, those monthly investments of $900 would have grown to approximately $5,600. During that same period, the man who chose the more expensive car would have spent around $5,400 simply keeping it on the road. Notice something important. In only half a year, both men committed almost the same amount of money. The difference is that one finished those 6 months owning a financial asset that continued to grow. The other finished them paying for an expense that would still be waiting for him next month. And that gap becomes dramatically larger once time is allowed to do its job. Because the real cost isn't those first 6 months, it's the next 5, 10, or 20 years. Every dollar that isn't invested today loses the chance to create new dollars tomorrow. And then those new dollars never get the chance to create even more. That's exactly how wealth compounds. But it's also exactly how wealth quietly fails to grow. The most interesting part is that this cost never appears on your credit card statement. No bank will ever send you a notification saying, this car also cost you the $180,000 that this money could have become over the next few decades. That bill remains invisible, and that's precisely why it's so dangerous, because many men believe they're simply buying a car, when in reality they're also giving up years of potential growth that same money could have produced. That's why wealthy men tend to look at major purchases differently. They don't see only the price. They see everything that money will no longer be able to build. And once you start putting all of those costs, the visible ones and the invisible ones, side by side, you begin to realize an even more uncomfortable truth. The car was never the real problem. The problem has always been when most men decide to buy it, because both wealthy men and average men drive cars. Both can enjoy comfort. Both can appreciate a well-built vehicle. And at some point in life, both might even buy the exact same model. The difference is rarely the car itself. It's the order in which that decision happens. Many men turn a car into a financial priority, but when that happens too early, the car stops being a reward. It starts competing directly with everything that still needed to be built, with investments, with financial reserves, with the freedom to take advantage of better opportunities, and even with the peace of mind to get through difficult times without sacrificing the future. Meanwhile, men who build lasting wealth usually take the opposite path. They don't wait because they dislike cars. They wait because they understand that there comes a point when a car no longer represents a financial burden, when their wealth is already generating income, when their investments are already working on their own, when buying a nicer car doesn't disrupt the financial plan they've spent years building. At that point, the car stops being a priority. It simply becomes a natural consequence of the wealth that already exists. And that change in order may seem small, but it completely changes the outcome of an entire lifetime. A man who puts wealth first buys assets that continue strengthening his financial position. A man who puts appearances first often spends years supporting an image that hasn't yet been built in reality. And maybe that's the biggest trap of all, confusing the signs of wealth with actual wealth. Because looking successful might impress people for a few minutes, but building wealth can change the way a man lives for decades. When you look at it this way, it becomes easy to see that the real trap was never the car itself. It was trying to live like a wealthy man before building the foundation that makes that life sustainable. And when that order is reversed, the price is almost always paid in years of lost financial freedom. The good news is that this trap can be avoided. There's one incredibly simple rule that helps you make this decision much more intelligently, and it can keep a single car from delaying your wealth-building journey for years. After everything we've talked about, you've probably realized that the goal was never to convince you to give up owning a car. The goal has always been to keep a car from becoming an obstacle to building the wealth you want. And fortunately, there's a remarkably simple way to avoid making that mistake. It doesn't require earning more money, and it doesn't require discovering some extraordinary investment. It simply comes down to following 3 decisions that can make an enormous difference over the years. The first one is straightforward. Whenever possible, choose a used car that's around 3 or 4 years old. There's a very clear financial reason for this. The first few years are when a vehicle experiences most of its depreciation. In other words, when you buy a brand new car, you're usually paying for the period in which it loses value the fastest. By choosing a slightly older vehicle, you let someone else absorb that initial loss. In practice, you're still getting a modern, safe, and reliable car, but you're paying significantly less for the same level of usefulness. The second rule is even more important. Follow the 15% rule. That means all of your car-related expenses, your payment, insurance, fuel, and maintenance, shouldn't exceed roughly 15% of your monthly income. Imagine a man earning about $6,000 per month. Using this rule, his total monthly car cost should stay close to $900. If that vehicle requires much more than that to own, it's probably taking up a larger share of his finances than it should. And when that happens, there's less money available for investing, building cash reserves, and growing wealth. This rule helps ensure that your car serves your life instead of forcing your life to serve your car. There's also a third step that very few people truly appreciate. Keep the same car for many years. We live in a culture that constantly encourages upgrading. There's always a newer model, a new technology, a more modern design. But financially, replacing your car too often is one of the most effective ways to repeat the depreciation cycle over and over again. The longer you keep a dependable vehicle, the lower its annual ownership cost tends to become. You spread the initial purchase over many years. You avoid new fees. You avoid taking on new loans. and you dramatically reduce the amount of money that has to be directed toward an asset that will continue losing value. Interestingly, many men believe that building wealth requires incredibly sophisticated decisions. In reality, a large portion of wealth is created through simple choices repeated consistently over many years. At the end of the day, wealth is rarely built by one major decision. More often than not, it's built by the expenses you chose not to turn into permanent financial commitments. Maybe the most important decision was never choosing between an expensive car and a cheap one. Maybe it has always been deciding whether your money will work to impress people for a few moments or to build the life you truly want over the years ahead. Think about that. Now I'd like to hear from you. Do you think most men buy cars at the right time or too early? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this video gave you a new perspective on money and building wealth, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. If you know someone who's about to buy a new car, this might be the video they need to watch before making that decision. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.